Salve Almis, and welcome to this week's video tutorial, Campbell University, Latin 102, Spring 2024. This is Dr. Thomas at the controls, and tonight we're going to be exploring the perfect active system. What is the perfect active system? Well, it is a system of verb tense endings with the perfect tense as its meaning. What is the perfect tense? Well, in English, we have the present tense, we have the past tense, we have the perfect tense, we have the future tense, we have the future perfect tense, we have the past continuous, and so in English we have a variety of tenses. So it should come as no surprise that Latin has a variety of tenses as well, and that is spelled out here in these introductory remarks, which you will definitely want to read. Here we have a review of our verb system. And I'm going to kind of go to what's important for us is just as we've been learning osmos tisnit for our present tense verb endings, here we have a new tense and we need to memorize and be able to apply new endings. Istiit, imos istis erunt. Istiit, imos istis erunt. But we also have the pluperfect, which is the perfect stem with the irregular form of to be in the imperfect or past tense form. Eram, eres, erat, eramos, erates, erant. But we also have the future perfect, ero, eris, erit, eremos, eritis, erent, again applied to the perfect stem. And here we have the irregular form of to be in the future perfect. As far as translation goes, you'll want to read this. This is not too difficult, but there are some differences between English and Latin that are important. Most of the time, especially in the Wheelock's Latin, we will want to translate the exercises using our simple past, whereas the true perfect, for example, have or has, is going to be less common unless the context makes it clear that we're talking about some action that is still going on in the present. You'll see this when we get into the various exercises, but as always, you want to read through this chapter and then pay particular attention to the examples. And then, as I've said often, please do the self-tutorial exercises in the back of the book, for which you also have the answers. Here's our learning vocabulary. You will have a test the week after next. More about that, but that will be on chapters 10, 11, 12, and you will need to know this vocabulary in each chapter for the test. Once again, please do the self-tutorial exercises at your leisure before tackling the Sententi Antiqui, because it uses grammar and vocabulary at an easier level, and this will prepare you for these ancient sayings or proverbs. All right, let's go ahead and delve into our Sententi Antiqui. Here we have our in principio Deus creavit caelum et terram et Deus creavit hominem. Let me go ahead and pull our declension chart so we have that as a reference. So we can see here that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So let me go ahead and write that down. So this is right from the book of Genesis, translated by Saint Jerome, known as the Vulgate. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. let's take a look at this in greater detail before we continue with it. So, in the beginning, in principio, that is second declension ablative singular. Hence, that's why it ends in O. Time expressions normally, or often rather, are in either the accusative or the ablative. So in this case, in the beginning, in principio. But then Deus is our subject. Creavit, here is our istiit, imus istis erot. And so this is where we need to start being able to distinguish between different endings. Now, this should look different than the present tense. So if I pull out our Whitaker's Words, which I highly recommend in addition to the regular dictionary, you can see that this is our perfect active indicative third person singular. Now, if I can compare that to with this, you can see that's present tense. So if you look at creat, where we get words like creation or create, but here we have the stem ending, which looks like, which is a V, but then we have our ending. So again, this is all spelled out in the beginning of the chapter, which again, if this were an in-class course, we would take our time reading through this, and so I'm going to trust you can do this on your own. But as your book points out, we need to be able to recognize the stem or the root of a verb. In fact, they give it to you right here. So the stems of the verbs, and then add our isti, imus, istis, erot. So if we go back to the example here, in the beginning God created, we need past tense because the verb is in the past tense. And then the kailum et teram, kailum, that is second declension accusative singular, and then teram, first declension accusative singular. Those are our direct objects. So in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and God created man. So let's go ahead and put that there as well. And God created man. Et Deus creavit hominum. Now, man is third declension accusative singular, em. So again, with nouns, you need to be able to memorize and learn or recall which declension a noun belongs to, and then proceed accordingly. Again, if we're not sure, we look it up. You're going to see this is homo homines for our root forms, homo homines. This tells us it's third declension, but here it's being used as the accusative direct object, hence the em ending. And then you have your possible translations depending on the context. Duo in triumpho Caesar praetulit hunc titulum veni vidi vici. So this is from the Roman historian Suetonius, celebrating his quick victory at Zela in Asia Minor in 47 BC, and they give us some vocabulary which we want to use. And it says, in triumph, Caesar praetulit. Here, this is perfect tense because there's that tuli, perfect stem. So remember, if it's in italics, that's a possible translation. If not, these are derivatives from those Latin words. So in triumph, Caesar displayed this placard. So let me go ahead and write that down. So in triumph, Caesar displayed this placard. I came, oops, I can type here. I saw, I conquered. So in triumph, in triumpho, so here we have another ablative ending, second declension, ablative singular. Again, the ablatives are tricky, but generally they occupy a number of prepositional phrases. So in is a preposition, in is a preposition, hence followed by the ablative. So in triumph, Caesar's our subject, and then displayed this placard. I came, I saw, I conquered. So notice Veni Vidi Vici are all in the perfect tense, which of course is the topic, the grammar topic in this chapter. So very famous words, I came, I saw, I conquered. All right, moving ahead here to number 3. This one is interesting because it's short, but it'll test your ability to use logic. Vixit is the past tense form of vivit, which means to live. So again, if we're not sure, we look these things up. So you can see vivo, where we get words like vivacious, but it's past tense because it has this ending here, eat, and then also the base form ends in x. So we have vixi. So, and it means he lived. So let's go ahead and put that there. So he lived. And then, so he lived while he lived well. So he lived while he lived well. So this one is interesting because kind of is that continuous theme in ancient writers of Carpe Diem sees today. It's not how long you live, but how well you live, whether or not you did something meaningful, pursuit of glory or some other form of salvation. So he lived while he lived well. Quatuor, adolescence, I might say an adolescent. So adolescens vult dio vivere senex dio vixit. So an adolescent wants to live for, nowadays we might say teenager, but an adolescent wants to live for a long time. An old man has lived for a long time. Wants to live for a long time. And then, let's see, they use it. Now, this is interesting because here we have the so-called true perfect, I think, in our translation. When we talk about the perfect, this, of course, is how we use it in English. But you can see, if you look at the context of these other ones, using these in the past tense, because in the beginning, God has created the heavens and the earth, and God has created man. Just sounds off because we're used to the other translation. And again, this is spelled out in your book, but here the context does make a connection to some earlier vantage point of action. So we want to use what's called the true perfect in our translation. So an adolescent wants to live, vivere, for a long time. An old man has lived for a long time. So vivere, of course, is the infinitive form of vivo, which here we have the perfect form. And so we need to be able to recognize our so-called principal parts. So if we take a look at this right here, I'll type in vivo. You can see here is our second principal part. So I live, to live, I lived, and then to be lived, or to survive, and so forth. We haven't had the fourth principal part yet, but these are important to learn. It's no different than English. I go, I went, I have gone. I eat, I ate, I have eaten. So these have to be memorized in English too. Number 5. So you can see that sentences are fairly short, which is good because this is a new grammar topic. So that's good for us. So non ille dio vixit sed dio fuit, Seneca. Again, ultimately executed by Nero. So not he for a while he lived, but for a while he was. So this one we have to kind of think about what that means. So he did not live for a long time. This one's a little bit trickier to translate because it literally means he did not live for a long time, but he existed, but he was for a long time. Both those sound a little bit wooden in English, but you get the sense that even though his life wasn't long, in terms of living, that he existed and perhaps did something more than the number of his years can quantify. This one's a little bit trickier to translate. So he um, didn't live for a long time. In English, probably say he didn't live a long life, but doesn't say that, so I'm going to keep it literal. So he didn't live for a long while, because dio means for a long while. So he didn't live for a long while, but he existed for a long while. Literally, he was, but he was for a long while. This is one where it loses a little bit in translation. Might have to give a freer translation. The idea is clear, though, is even though he didn't live a long number of years, chronologically, that while he did live, once again, carpe diem, his life and his years were somehow meaningful. Hui dixisti pulchre. So, like we, I don't know if I like that translation. Do they give us any other options? That sounds a little bit too corny. So maybe wow. Wow might be a better possibility. So, wow, he said beautifully. So while he spoke beautifully. So his words were beautiful. So wow, or excuse me, you spoke beautifully. So wow, you spoke beautifully. So let me write that out, explain it to you. So wow, and then you spoke beautifully. So let me try to explain this in first. So wow, again, I'm going to change the punctuation just slightly. You spoke, because that's isti. So if we go back to isti eat, imos istis eront. So there's our isti, which is our second person singular. So while you spoke, and then if we look at the rest of the sentence, pulchre is an adverb, which means beautifully. In this context, it doesn't give us a translation, but so we may have to increase our confidence, take a look at that. And so beautifully, so in other words, those words were well said and well spoken. Septem, Sophocles ad summum senectum tragedias fecit. So Sophocles literally made tragedies, probably say wrote tragedies, or produced. So Sophocles made tragedies well into old age, literally into the summit of his ages, or into extreme old age. So probably in English might say wrote, but here they have made. So I'm going to kind of keep that literal if possible. Sophocles made, think of Oedipus Rex, made tragedies well into old age. So let's take a look at this one. Sophocles made, so there's our past tense. Tragedies, because that is first declension accusative plural. That's the direct object. And then here we have well into old age. Ad is always followed by the accusative. So sure enough, first declension accusative singular is am. But then the noun here, old age, that's third declension accusative singular is em. Sure enough, am, em. So, of course, this is one of the challenges in Latin. Only practice can solve that is learning what declension nouns belong to. All right, moving on here. So, illi non solum pecuniam sed etiam vitam pro patria perfunderunt. So here, isti, imos istis erunt. So there's our third person plural perfect form, and you can see it means poured forth. So illi means those, or like those men. So those men poured forth not only money, but also life for their country. So in this sense, they dedicated, you might say, but we're going to follow poured forth here. So even though that loses a bit, if you're giving something continuously, that's the sense of it. So those men, Ili, poured forth not only money, but also their life for their country. Literally, fatherland. So if you like fatherland better, that's fine. So pro patria, of course, this is where we get words like patriotism. So those men poured forth. So pro fut ero, they give us the meaning here. Not only money, non solum pecuniam. So pecuniam is first declension accusative singular. Not only money, but also life. Now they do have life in the singular, so if you want to say their lives, you could, for English grammar's sake. And then for their country. When we use pro, it's always followed by the ablative. So sure enough, first declension ablative singular is a. All right, moving on here to number 9. Reges Romam a principio habere libertatem Lucius Brutus Romanus dedit. So the kings literally held Rome in the beginning. Lucius Brutus gave liberty to Romans. Let me write this out and then I'll explain it. So the Romans held Rome in the beginning. The Romans held Rome in the beginning. And then Lucius Brutus gave liberty to the Romans. Brutus gave liberty to the Romans. As you know, Rome was originally a monarchy. In 753 BC, but in 509 it became a republic, and then in 31 BC it became an empire. This is the great ancestor of the same Brutus who was part of the assassination of Julius Caesar at 2 Brutae. And so Brutus himself, Romans were very tradition conscious, thought of himself as continuing the defense of Roman liberty against any perceived tyranny, in that case of Caesar, although that is a very complex story, which we can't get into now. But what's interesting about this one is we have how to translate this one. And so held, in other words, held in terms of holding power. So the Romans held Rome in the beginning. So you might even say the Romans ruled Rome in the beginning. But here they literally had. And then Lucius Brutus gave, dedit, because that's past tense. So that's do dare dedidatum. Liberty to the Romans. Liberty is third declension accusative singular. And then to the Romans, Romanis. So that is second declension dative plural, Romanis. This actually might be a good verb to kind of do a deep dive in terms of what we're trying to achieve in this chapter. So take the verb I give. So do dari dedidatum. So I'm going to go ahead and put the principal parts here. So these are principal parts. I'm not going to put the macrons, but if I just say, there we go. So do dari dedi, here they use us, but you can use m as well. That's fine. So you can see this is what we're talking about. This is the third principal part. So let's take a look at the difference between the present tense and the past tense. So if I do present, we know this is do, I give, das, you give, dot, he, she, or it gives, damus, we give, datis, you all give, and dant, they give. But if we have the perfect, which we have in this chapter, then we have to use the perfect stem ending, which is actually the third principal part. Now, the third principal part is already in the first person singular perfect form. So it's deity. I don't add another I because that would be redundant. And then if you go back to just isti, eat, emos, istis, erunt, you can sort of see it's I, not I. So all I do now is add these endings. And it's going to look like this. So deity, so D-E-D, oops, and then E-Easti, and then D-E-D, because I'm using the third principal part. Put that in bold there, minus so you got to take off the E, but then emus, oops, I got ahead of myself there, eat, and then deidimus, deitis, and then deid erunt. So notice isti, eat, emus, istis, erunt. If I just put these in bold, again, I do not have the macrons on this, but the accent marks, but I think we can add those in our imagination. So there we go. Is isti, eat, emus, istis. Oops, I want italics and bold. And then erunt. Okay, so I gave, you gave, he or she or it gave, we gave, you all gave, they gave. So you can see the difference between the osmos tisnit, which is the present tense, and then the isti, eat, emus, istis, erunt. And so we just have to learn these new set of endings. So going back to number 10, subsistere autem libertatem perdimus, is that we destroyed liberty under Caesar. So I'm going to go back to our example here. Oops, I want bold. And that's going to be number 10. I can type here. However, so autem means however, we destroyed liberty under Caesar. So this one's fairly straightforward. So autem, however, we destroyed, perdidimus, so emus is we, and then destroyed. Liberty is third declension accusative singular, em, and then under Caesar is also third declension, that's why it ends in e, for under Caesar. And we'll actually stop with that one, and you can do 11 on your own if you're interested. All right, so the concept is new, but these sentences are fairly straightforward. So let's go ahead and do the Pliny writes. We'll call this Pliny writes. I'm not going to put the whole title. You can add that yourself. So Pliny writes. Let's put that in bold to be consistent here. Okay. And let's take a look at this longer passage. Oops. So they give you a little context here. Pliny in his epistles, book 5, chapter 16. And you can sort of see here that this is about the death of his daughter. And he's writing a letter to his friend to talk about the death of this young girl. So salve Marcelline, haec tibi scribo de fundano, amico nostro, quadit is filiam caram et bellum amisit, illa puella non decem et tres annos vixerat, sed natura ei multum sapientiam dederat, matram patrumque fratrumque sororumque nos et alios amicus magistros magistresque semper amibat et nos eam amibamus laudebamusque mediceam audi uvere non pot errant quoniam iliatum magnos animos habuit morbum nimis malum cum patientia talor avit nunc mi amice mite fundano nostra litere de fortuna serba filiae eos vale. So it is a good idea to read it aloud. It's going to help you learn the language, just like speaking English normally precedes learning how to write and grammar and all this stuff. So greetings, Matzilenius. So we got to put it back in the nominative form because English doesn't have that. So greetings, Matzilenius. So, oops. So greetings, Matzilenius. I spelled that right? I'm not sure. So M-A-R-C-E, and then I have too many L's. L-L-I-N-U-S. L-L-I-N-U-S. Okay. So, and again, that's just the person's name. So greetings, Marcellinius. I am writing. So scribo, like I am writing. Scribo, I am writing. Let's go ahead and take a look at that here. That is scribo, if we're not sure. So there it is, scribo, scribere, scripsi, scriptum, where we get words like script. So I am writing. So that's a good review of that. I am writing this to you about Fundanus. So let me go ahead and write that out here. So I am writing this to you about Fundanus. Let me try to explain that. I am writing this. Now this is referring to the letter. To you, TB, about Fundanus, our friend. So here's just a positive. Our friend. Because he lost his dear and beautiful daughter. Because he lost his dear and beautiful daughter. So let's try to explain that. So because is quad, he is lost misit. That's mito, mitere, misi, misum. So we may have to look that up, but we need to start learning our principal parts. So if I type in this, you're going to see mito, mitere, misi. Now they do have a prefix on there, making it a compound verb, but it means lost. In terms of loss of life. And then who did he lose? So notice that's first declension, accusative, accusative, and accusative, because they all end in am, because this is the direct object here. She is the object of the loss. So put it all together. Greetings, Matzilenius. I'm writing this to you about Fundanus, our friend, because he lost his dear and beautiful daughter. She had not lived 13 years. Now they give us a note here in terms of how to read that. So in other words, that she had not lived 13 years. So let's go ahead and put that in there. So she had not lived 13 years. But, so probably in English you might say she was only 13 years old. But nature had given to her much wisdom. But nature, actually let me check the verb tense on that one. yeah, had given. So we got to put this, I'll explain this in a second, because nature had given to her much wisdom. Now, this is the first time that we've had the so-called, change that right there. This is the first time we've had the so-called past perfect or the pluperfect. Um, so this is something, if I go back, let's see, where's, I don't know why it's not. I don't want that. There we go. Um, so this is the pluperfect because we have the perfect stem with erat. We translate that as had plus the participle. So this is I had praised. In fact, I'll give you some translation right up here. You had praised, she had praised, and so forth. So if we look at this example, we need to be mindful of this tense, otherwise it would be wrong in our translation. Namely, nature, that's our subject, had given to her much wisdom. I guess they want us to say had given her much wisdom. That's fine. Yeah. So let's take a look at how it continues. Now here, matram, patram both end in em, so we need to be able to recognize those as the direct object. So keep that in mind. Is mother, father, brother, sister, we and other friends, her teachers, always loving. So our subject and verb is all the way at the end here. That's kind of annoying, to be honest with you. So amebat is she was loving. So she was always loving, because semper means always loving. And then who was she always loving? Well, her mother, her father, her brother, her sister, us and other friends, her teachers. So I guess she was a very respectful young lady who listened to her parents. So she was always loving her, and then we'll just string this together. Always loving her mother, father, let's see here, brother and sister, and sister. We and us and other friends. It's kind of a long sentence, but us and other friends. And then her, here they have like male and female teachers, but I think in English should say her teachers. But it does distinguish between magistros, which would be male teachers, and magistres, which would be female teachers. So there's a good review of, notice that all of these people, except for the daughter, are in the the accusative direct object, as we just pointed out. So, and then it kind of continues here, Latin like long sentences, and we were, I assume they have always. No, they don't have. So, and we were praising and loving her. So, and we were loving and praising her. So here we go. Amibamos, that's actually, remember, that's the perfect tense, excuse me, the imperfect, which we had earlier in the book. So we were loving her, am, so nos we, amibamos, we're loving her, and praising her, laudibamos. Once again, if you're not sure of, just like I'm doing now to show you, you have to look up these words. And imperfect, active, indicative, first person plural, we were praising. The doctors were not able to help her. The doctors were not able to help her. So let's take a look at this one. The medici, medicines, the doctors, Were not able, non poterunt, to help. There's our infinitive, her. But since she, I'm going to go ahead and write this because the word order in this one's a little bit tricky, but since she. So sometimes you have to experiment with the word order. So autem means but, quoniam means since, and then she literally had a great mind. What it means is that she was full of courage, is kind of what it means in this case. So magnos animos can be courage, but since she had great courage, because nobody wants to be told that there's no help because you lose hope, but she didn't despair. And so she had great courage. As you know, animos can be translated many different ways in Latin, but because she had a great mind, she had a great intellect, she had a great soul, I guess you could do that too. I chose courage, but maybe spirit, character, or even soul might work, although in that case we're tending more towards Christian context, which Pliny, being a Roman, was probably not thinking of. So I'm going to go with courage. But since she had great courage, she tolerated death. So morbum means death. She tolerated her painful death with great patience. She tolerated her, I'm going to say morbidity, although that might be too abstract, with great patience. So there's other ways to translate this, but I'm going to say, but since she had great courage, she tolerated, toleravit, that's past tense. And then morbum has a couple options here. Maybe morbidity sounds too clinical, but yeah, maybe we could say her illness might be better. Her illness with great patience. So with, or I guess it's just with patience. So malum, let me change that a little bit here. So with patience. And then for malum, her bad illness, I guess is what they have here, malum morbum, because they both end in um. Now, my friend, send our fundanos letters about the poor fortune of his daughter. So that's kind of a salutation. So let me write this out here. So now, my friend, send fundanos. So let me try to explain that. So now, my friend, mite is the imperative going all the way back to chapter 1. So send, so giving a request. And then send to our fundanos, literally letters, or a letter about the poor fortune of his daughter. So they have litteres about the poor fortune of his daughter. And then and vale, of course, means farewell. So let me go over this last sentence again. So now, my friend, send, literally our fundanos, a letter about thee. So Latin often doesn't have thee, so we have to probably put that in, about the poor fortune, fortuna acerba, of his daughter. So this last ablative phrase is a little bit tricky. Remember, day is always followed by the ablative. So first declension, ablative singular is a. So that's where we're getting fortune. But then we have the adjective. That's where we get words like acerbic. So I said poor fortunate, poor, P-O-R, acerba, because that's also first declension, ablative singular. But then of his daughter, because first declension, genitive singular is AE, and then eos means his. So that one's a little bit tricky. Might just need to be memorized. Ablative, again, is probably the trickiest case in Latin because you need to basically have command of the Latin and know how to translate it into idiomatic English. All right. We don't have to do this one, but this is kind of funny. So recently there was a doctor. So Diolios recently was a doctor, and now he is an undertaker. And here it says what he does as an undertaker, he had done as a doctor. So Diolios still buries his clients. And so there are doctors and there are doctors. So all right, so that was it for this chapter. Again, as I will be pointing out, so you have this chapter this week. Next week, you'll have a review week. And then the following week, I'll be in touch. You will have to take the test. So not next week, but the following week on chapters 10, 11, 12. And like last semester, it will consist of vocabulary, matching, selected sententia antiqui from chapters 10, 11, 12, and then one of the longer passages as well. And then a short essay where you're thinking about the language. Here they give you some guide in terms of context and interpretation. All right, as always, please email me if you have any questions. Valete omnes.